today on the Frontline Health podcast.
Absolutely. I think alpha-gal is easier to isolate because it's like there's just antibody testing and that's it.
Yeah.
That's it. Like that's the way to alpha-gal is a much more simple process. There's less false negatives, there's less false positives. So that one's just really, there's just an antibody testing method for that. There's not a lot of all these complexities.
Okay.
Whereas Lyme, there's almost this screening process called the ELISA, and it's also antibody testing. However, like you were saying, Troy, prior, it's gauging an immune response. So if your immune system hasn't really reacted to the Lyme yet, most people really show up with nothing on this ELISA screening. And the problem with that is it's kind of the first line. So a lot of times if people don't pass that, there's nothing after that. They don't get tested any further. It's like, oh, you don't have Lyme.
Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Frontline Health podcast by Centurion Health, where we share health news, tips, and insights to help you take ownership of your health. I'm Evan Patrick. With me, as always, founder and CEO of Centurion Health, Mr. Troy Duell, and we've also got a special guest on today's podcast.
We do. Super excited about having him here with us. Got Daniel Justice, who is with Justice Health Coaching. The great thing about Daniel is he's a certified holistic health coach, and he has the personal experience to go along with his knowledge that he's built up over the years when it comes to Lyme disease specifically. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be talking about two things that are getting a lot of airplay lately, which is Lyme disease and alpha-gal diagnosis. To put it in perspective, since 2009, the number of diagnosed patients with alpha-gal were in the hundreds. Today, there are roughly 450,000 people. Wow. So it's growing quickly, and Lyme is not any different. Lyme grew from about 320,000 in 2010 to about 630,000 individuals suffering from it today. So, and that's growing. And we believe that that number is actually low because it's being misdiagnosed and not diagnosed. So we're excited to have Daniel with us because he's had years of experience with this and dealing with it. And really want to start out by just saying thanks for joining us, being a part of it, and tell us a little bit about your experience and where you came from with Lyme disease and kind of your background.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm really excited to be here, Evan, Troy. Thanks for having me. My journey is roughly 13 years with Lyme. So it's had a lot of highs. There's been a lot of lows, but it's all started for me in 2013. I was a sophomore at Auburn, and I just woke up one day and I was not the same person. Pale skin, rashes, fatigue, kind of a constant buzz-like feeling going on in my head. And, days go by, weeks go by, months go by, and you realize, hey, I'm not getting any better. Something is wrong. So I went through the medical system in Alabama. At this time in 2013, we were very behind with Lyme disease. We're blessed to have some pretty good practitioners in the area now, but I ended up seeing a neurologist. I got misdiagnosed with an autoimmune disease, put on steroids, kind of the worst protocol possible with someone with a compromised immune system. So I had bounced from doctor to doctor to doctor. We had ruled out a very good amount of stuff, and it almost became a process of elimination where we retested me for the autoimmune disorder, and I was negative. And then I started wondering, what is this? I started hearing about the controversy of Lyme and how underdiagnosed it was. I ended up ordering my own lab work through primary care, and that's where these bands started to show up, and there was something there. So I went to pretty much the only Lyme literate doctor in the area. It was a Timothy Callahan. He was in Tupelo, Mississippi. I actually just looked him up. He's in Memphis now. And I know he's been on a wait list. He's a great practitioner, Lyme literate. He was kind of doing the Richard Horowitz approach, who's a big influence in the Lyme scene. And it was a great start. We got put on a lot of antibiotics. I understood how to take probiotics at night. However, it was kind of a 2-year period where I didn't understand pacing and detoxing and how fast to go and when to slow down. I was, a very type A person where I was like, all right, let's take all these antibiotics. Let's take them at the highest dose possible. And I wasn't flushing any of this out of my system. So 2015, is another. Yeah, you go ahead, Troy.
Yeah, let me ask you a question. So how long was it between 2013 when you woke up that day and then when you actually found out that, hey, this is definitively Lyme?
Yeah, that's a great question. It was roughly a year.
Roughly a year.
Right around a year.
Which, if I'm not mistaken, that's actually pretty short amount of time. And kudos to you for continuing down that path, because you had a fairly short journey to get there. But what I've read and heard about with lots of people is it could be 10 to 15 years for a lot of people before they find out that what has been going on has been Lyme.
Absolutely. So,
and it's a frustrating thing because, like what you dealt with, a lot of them say it's all in your head. It's not, this isn't a real thing. We've tested you for this. You don't have anything. And if I remember correct, Lyme is one of those that you could test for at one time and it may not be there because it hides in the system.
Absolutely.
And the next time you test for it, it could be there.
Absolutely. It's very complicated. It's very, at the time, was very controversial. And, I went through the whole process of it's all in your head. There's nothing going on. You're just depressed. Endless amounts of doctors. The CDC didn't acknowledge, any chronic Lyme at that time. Now they're acknowledging post-Lyme, but they're not still acknowledging chronic Lyme. And the infectious disease community still won't handle any of the co-infections of Lyme, the complexity of Lyme, really beyond a couple weeks of doxycycline. So, blessed by a year in to have ordered my own lab work, to have ruled out all these possibilities, to be under a good practitioner. And, he was hardcore. He went all out. I did end up having, got off to a great start. I was like, wow, we found what's going on. The diagnosis is such a relief, right? You're like, oh my goodness, at least we know something. Couldn't afford all the co-infection testing at the time. So we had to make a few assumptions and some clinical diagnoses as well. But yeah, I went too fast. And 2015 happened, and that was pretty much the worst year of my life. That's where I really started to deal with the mental side of this, and how much it can infect the brain, and how much that can start to affect your physical body, and vice versa. So it became really a mental and physical battle in 2015. And I think after 2 years, there's a burden after that of, wow, I'm worse than I've ever been. We've tried to treat it. Ended up getting, well enough to go back to college. At this point, I'm just supporting my immune system, which I think is what a lot of people are doing right now as well. I was just buying time. I was like, I'm too scared to treat the Lyme hard because I had the worst relapse of my life. I also don't want to do nothing at the same time. So at this point, I'm just taking a lot of immunomodulatory stuff. I'm taking a lot of stuff that really boosts the immune system. Something else worth mentioning is mono became a pretty big part of my journey.
Really?
That is something that...
Is that fairly common with other Lyme sufferers as well?
Yes.
Really?
The Epstein-Barr, I'm seeing a lot when people... Unfortunately, all these people with Lyme, they have to list like 10 things that's wrong with them. You see the co-infections, you see the Lyme, you see a lot of times POTS. You see, with me, we can go into that more, several co-infections, but Epstein-Barr is on there a lot. I see it with a lot of Lyme patients. And the problem is Lyme tends to kind of trap these viruses, and they tend to replicate and just come back over and over and over again. So it added this complexity of, okay, now mono is active. We can't get rid of mono. How do we suppress it? Dealt with that through college, was good enough to graduate, got married. Starting to get, my wife and I, we moved out to Oregon. At this point, I'm treating mildly. I feel like I'm still buying time. COVID happened, and that is where I truly just fell apart. I think COVID, I'm learning a lot about long COVID now, and, acute COVID, and Lyme and COVID do not go well together at all. I thought mono was bad. Then COVID came. Now you got mono and COVID. And that was kind of where it was like, okay, there's a potential maybe at this point to die. I think that was the closest I got to,
when I think just hearing that story, I'm sure any of the listeners out there can understand this is a very, very traumatic disease that can have lifelong implications,
Absolutely.
especially if people aren't coming alongside to really help in the medical community.
Absolutely.
There's much more now than there was. So if we can just back up just a little bit,
Absolutely.
what exactly is Lyme disease and what is alpha-gal, and are they the same and how are they different?
Yeah, that's a great question. So a lot of people with alpha-gal do not have Lyme, and a lot of people with Lyme do not have alpha-gal.
Okay.
And then there's people that have both. So
there are two separate diseases that are going on.
Very separate.
Could the same tick have alpha-gal
Yes.
and Lyme?
Yes, correct.
Okay.
Just like these co-infections like Babesia, mycoplasma, Rocky Mountain spotted fever, someone could have also gotten alpha-gal.
Okay.
I've talked to, I'm not super, I need to learn more about alpha-gal, but I understand that, it's a very strong histamine response to a sugar molecule. And it's not this bacterial infection like Lyme, though, where you're like, we got to kill it. We got to end it. Alpha-gal is kind of like, we need to modulate the immune system, eliminate these foods that are now setting me off, avoid more tick bites. That can happen. You get bit by a tick again, especially if you live in this concentrated area. Yeah. So alpha-gal, it's really important to be like, okay, we don't need to be exposing ourselves to more ticks. But then a lot of people are not able to eat all these meats, all these animal fats. And it definitely limits their ability to travel. And I think there's also a psychological element of that where you have to eliminate so much food that you're like, well, what do I eat?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So I would say alpha-gal is a lot more simple, where you're looking at just the immune system, a histamine response, and elimination of foods. People do recover from it. So a lot of people are intervening with stuff like quercetin, stuff that you guys make, stuff like liposomal vitamin C, propolis. Much more simple than Lyme. However, if you have both, not good. Right. Now you're eliminating probably gluten. Now you're eliminating probably dairy. Now you're eliminating probably all these animal meats. And at that point, it's kind of like, how do I eat?
So is Lyme why you would have to eliminate the gluten? Because I've never heard gluten with the alpha-gal piece.
Generally speaking, people with Lyme tend to eliminate sugar, which I think is great for, most people other than honey and fruit, and dairy and gluten. And I think the gluten is a lot of the chemicals that are being processed in the flour. I don't know how much of it is actually the gluten. I hear people going overseas and then they can eat all the gluten they want.
Right.
So, I can eat sourdough bread. So it's a little complex, but the alpha-gal it's a reaction, but it's not this bacterial manifestation that you are now going after and trying to kill.
Okay. Man. So what's the difference? Go ahead, Evan.
Yeah.
No, I was just going to say that list of foods, if someone has both alpha-gal and Lyme presenting in this way, the list of foods that someone can eat gets really, really small, because you mentioned dairy, you mentioned gluten, even though it might not specifically be gluten, sugar, and then with the alpha-gal, you have the elimination of the red meats. So I'm just imagining that for a second. And a couple of things I just want to kind of point out and zoom in on that you mentioned.
Yeah.
You mentioned the difference between chronic Lyme and post-Lyme, which is one thing that you said is becoming more, recognized now, is the post-Lyme. Is there a difference between those two things, or is it a matter of just kind of how the medical community is defining that?
Yeah, that's a great question. Chronic Lyme, the problem with it is it's still in the general Western community not being acknowledged. For example, I've been going through this for 13 years. I'm very blessed to be in a pretty good spot now, but there has still been an active infection going on for 13 years. Whereas today, if I go home and I, take a lot of antimicrobials or antibiotics, I am still having a reaction because of an active infection that's been going on over a decade. The medical community doesn't want to acknowledge that is still going on. So I think that's very important to clarify. When they're defining post-Lyme, which is at least now being introduced, the good thing is they're acknowledging that people are still having symptoms. So I think that's good. However, they're saying it's more the fallout of what this tick did to the body. It's not an active infection. It's not actually live. It's just what did it damage and how are people recovering? But that still creates this giant gap between the medical community and the traditional Western community, because some people are being looked at with post-Lyme that still have Lyme. So the best way I can summarize it is post-Lyme is symptomatic treatment only. How do we improve someone's quality of life? What did the tick do that we need to repair? Whereas chronic Lyme is, there's an active infection that still needs to be treated.
Yeah, which is not really that big of a surprise, because that's what our medical community is really trained on, which is how do we treat the symptoms as opposed to going to the core of the problem. And I think Lyme is probably one of those diseases and infections that has suffered from that pattern the most in the medical history. But you mentioned symptoms. So people listening, what are some of the symptoms that they might have with Lyme versus the symptoms that you might have with alpha-gal, so people can start to recognize what's going on?
Absolutely. So with Lyme is kind of the great imitator, where, hence me getting diagnosed with an autoimmune disorder. It could have very well been that, because it looked like it. Lyme can cause, fever, migraines, insomnia, night sweats, nervous system dysregulation, disruption of your microbiome. I feel like you could list about 100 symptoms, because Lyme can almost look like just about anything out there. And a lot of that is because not every case of Lyme is the same. Some people have Babesia, some people have Bartonella, some people have Rocky Mountain spotted fever. It's kind of like soda versus Sprite, right?
And help us understand the difference between Babesia, Rocky Mountain fever, and what was the other you mentioned? Babesia?
Absolutely. Bartonella is something that I've dealt with. It's generally diagnosed through co-infection testing, and it's diagnosed through your rashes can start to really help limit down what we're dealing with. So I had
these are all different bacteria of Lyme, or are they different bacteria from different ticks and considered different diseases themselves?
They're akin to Lyme because they're transmitted through ticks that carry Lyme, but they're other bacterial organisms that were present in the tick.
Okay.
We're finding, though, a lot of people that have Lyme have generally at least one co-infection.
Okay.
But
interesting.
Babesia can be a lot of exhaustion, fatigue, air hunger, whereas Bartonella and Babesia is akin to malaria. So, it's treated. There is some overlap with how we treat malaria, how we treat Babesia. Bartonella is a lot more neuropsychiatric symptoms, neurological, gets into a lot more of the mental health manifestations of this. A lot of anxiety. It can be burning foot pain. Those are the two that I have. Those are the two that, as far as we know, I've dealt with Babesia and Bartonella.
Okay.
Rocky Mountain spotted fever can be just a very much more aggressive manifestation. It does, there is generally a very high fever associated with it. I had a buddy, he had Rocky Mountain spotted fever. He ended up getting like IV antibiotics. He was so sick. But
that's crazy.
Lyme becomes so complicated because it's okay. Which of these infections do we have? Do we have the alpha-gal?
Yeah.
Do we have, and like you were saying, Evan, then you got to be like, well, what do I eat? Like high fiber, legumes, lots of oils. You're going to have to get really, really in depth with your diet.
So how do you test? Because there's so many different things going on. If somebody feels like they have it, is there a test that they'd go, hey, can you test me for this?
Yes.
Did you have something?
You go ahead, Evan.
No, I was just going to say, just piggybacking onto that. I was asking my wife about Lyme disease. She's in her first year of residency right now, and she's very fascinated in it just because of how complicated of a diagnosis it is. And she said that it's a diagnosis of elimination. Essentially, you're trying to rule out everything else. But you also mentioned there are all these co-infections that are pretty typical for someone with Lyme disease. And so, what Troy's saying, like, is there a way to isolate without eliminating other things to get and like test for specifically Lyme and alpha-gal? So just to kind of, I guess, frame that for our listeners, that's the way that it's looked at when people go to the doctor and they suspect that that's what they have.
Absolutely. I think alpha-gal is easier to isolate because it's like there's just antibody testing and that's it.
Yeah.
That's it. Like that's the way to alpha-gal is a much more simple process. There's less false negatives, there's less false positives. So that one's just really there's just an antibody testing method for that. There's not a lot of all these complexities.
Okay.
Whereas Lyme, there's almost this screening process called the ELISA, and it's also antibody testing. However, like you were saying, Troy, prior, it's gauging an immune response. So if your immune system hasn't really reacted to the Lyme yet, most people really show up with nothing on this ELISA screening. And the problem with that is it's kind of the first line. So a lot of times if people don't pass that, there's nothing after that. They don't get tested any further. It's like, oh, you don't have Lyme. Western blot would be the next more accurate testing. Now we start to look at these very specific protein bands. There's numbers like 29, 31. I had a bunch of these pop up when I did tests, but there's more Lyme specific bands. And the one that we generally do is about a coin flip. So about 50% accuracy. I think now the number might be down to like 40%. So it's like, well, even if someone was negative on a Western blot, they still could have Lyme. So then we get into kind of this third layer of clinical diagnosis. Like what have we eliminated? Did the person pass the ELISA? Did they pass the Western blot? Let's say they failed both. They could still have Lyme disease.
So with the Western blot and the ELISA, are those blood tests or
they
are they?
Are.
Okay.
They are. They're both blood tests. You could order, I highly recommend a lab in California called IGeneX.
Okay.
The reason is they're much more comprehensive. They test for more bands. So you could, not be showing up with the bands with the traditional Western blot, but then you could send this to IGeneX and they're like, we're going to test for all these other ones. And if you have enough of these show up, you're going to have a positive test. So, I used IGeneX. I trusted them. I talked to them. I read about them. I know Horowitz used them. And that's where all my stuff started to pop up. Okay. Whereas on a traditional Western blot, it was just like, oh, you don't have these few bands, you're negative. But clinical diagnosis is important. You can start looking at someone's rashes, right?
Yeah.
A bullseye rash. It's like, okay, well, yeah, we're probably dealing with Lyme here. I had the cat scratch rashes, which were Bartonella. But then a lot of people get bit on their head, and you're never gonna, unless they shave their head, you're never gonna see the rash. And that's a very common place to be bit, is in your hairline, and then the tick will eventually just, kind of leech off.
Yeah.
After it's put this infection in you. So we don't even know really when I got Lyme.
Interesting.
I lived in Virginia, was bit by a lot of ticks.
Yeah.
I think my immune system was going through a lot as a sophomore. So part of me wonders, did it just manifest all of a sudden? Was it being a stealth bug and then it just came out?
Yeah.
Wow.
That's crazy.
Yeah, that's amazing. Troy, I know one of your favorite quotes that you share a lot is a Benjamin Franklin quote: "An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure." So yeah. And obviously, this is something that is on people's minds right now. News stories all over the place about Lyme and alpha-gal and the Lone Star tick and things like that people hear about. So do you have any tips or recommendations for people about how they can avoid this?
Yeah, so I think the first thing is be aware of your area. I hear of all these concentrated areas, especially like around where Lyme originated. It's like still the most concentrated area. So if you live in those areas, you have to be like very aware. Like, okay,
which is what area?
Connecticut.
Yeah,
Lyme, Connecticut, and that was around 1970. And there's not worth going into on this. A lot of conspiracy theories about kind of all how all this went down, and probably some truth in some of them as well. But I think probably for a part two on that. But it did originate around that time. Of course, it brings up the question, why did it come about around that time? I think that's very interesting. But there, now ticks in Alabama, that was a problem with my diagnosis was it doesn't exist over state lines. There's like a line right against a state, but then you have all these migratory animals, hence, all these infections being spread around. So I don't know of a state in the U.S. now that has not confirmed cases that originated from that state. So in Alabama, we still have ticks that could transmit Lyme.
Yep. And I have heard, I did a little bit of research, all 50 states, including Hawaii, now have Lyme.
Yeah.
And they found them in their ticks. So we've talked about a couple of things on how to avoid it.
Yeah.
Obviously, being aware of your surroundings. Is there anything else that you would say?
I would say there's a good amount of stuff. One is that they make a lot of sprays now that have very high amounts of like clove oil. They're generally like diluted with sunflower oil. They have geranium. They have some citrus oils. I use them. It makes me feel a lot better because I'm like, okay, if I sprayed myself down, it makes the ticks not want to latch.
Mm-hmm.
So if you live in one of these concentrated areas, use those sprays heavily. If you don't, I still use them when I go out into the woods. If I go hiking, if I do the such, I think that's a good little first line defense. But what if you get bit, right?
Yeah.
So what if that happens? One is you want to use some really fine tweezers. You want to be sure you very slowly take that tick off. You want to mark the date, the time. You want to take a picture of that area. You want to monitor that area. You want to save that tick too, because IGeneX will take that tick, and testing the tick is going to be more accurate than trying to test your body with, the whole Russian roulette of, am I going to test positive based off, when I talked to IGeneX, they were like, a lot of people test positive only after they've started treatment, because then the infection has manifested and started to attack. So save the tick. I would go ahead and have it tested. I'm at the point where I've dealt with this for 13 years. So I'm like, man, if I go back day one, why not kind of go through some of the legwork? I know it could be a pain. And, if my wife got bit by a tick tomorrow, we would be doing all this. I would also recommend to her, if she was bit, to probably start taking some astragalus. And there is some cream you can put on the bite too. The really popular one right now is called, there's one that has tea tree. It's got all this stuff. I think I actually wrote it down. Go Do Cream, I think, is a good brand of, okay, at least we're kind of trying to draw out some of the infection at the area.
So the idea of that cream is you put it on that area where the tick bite is, and it draws the bacteria out. Is that what's going on with it?
That would be the hope.
Okay.
We don't have proof that there's anecdotal stories, but we don't have proof of like, is there a magical thing to put on to just suck it all right out, right?
Yeah.
A lot of people think it's too late. I'm like, why not?
Yeah.
Because it obviously has worked for some people.
But I think, to piggyback on that, what I'd always heard, or what seems to be common now, is if you have a tick bite and you have the bullseye rash that everybody gets, you're supposed to get 2 to 6 weeks of antibiotic treatment.
Yeah.
Is that what you would still recommend if somebody had a tick bite, to go in and do that?
Well, one, I think you got to get lucky enough to have the bullseye rash.
Right, because it doesn't happen with all of them.
And to test positive, because if you just go to your general primary care doctor, it's generally going to be that ELISA test. Now, if you have the bullseye rash, I would imagine they would have the grace to be like, oh, yeah, let's go ahead and start you on some doxycycline, right? I don't know what more you need at that point. It's like, okay. And some people, those 2 to 6 weeks, we have some lucky individuals that they probably didn't have a very complex infection go into their body, plus the benefit of they treated immediately. Mm-hmm. So that would be my best advice too, is seek treatment as immediately as possible, because we know for a fact the earlier you hop on this, the quicker everything resolves, the less the long-term effects of all this.
Now, are there any ingredients, supplements, medications that you could take that would actually prevent it, or get your body in a place to where if you are bitten by a tick, that it would be able to fight it off quicker? Or is that almost a non-starter?
That's a great question. So I like Stephen Buhner a lot. He was a master herbalist. He died several years ago, but he read a lot. He wrote a lot of books, and his whole thing was like herbalism and Lyme. So he just studied herbs for ages and really learned about the nuances of Lyme. And a lot of companies have kind of risen up to his challenge and started making his protocols and his supplements. But I do believe that there are certain things that can set up a little bit of a defense mechanism and a shield. I think astragalus root is one of those things where it has some of those antimicrobial properties, but it's one of the best herbs to kind of shield your body if you are bit or exposed to ticks. So I do think there's credence. We don't know statistically like how often astragalus will always prevent a manifestation of Lyme disease. But if I lived in one of these areas with a lot of ticks, I'm already taking stuff, right?
Yeah.
But I would be taking astragalus regularly. It's good for your cortisol. It's good for your immune system. It's safe to take long term. So in my brain, it's like, why not? Because there are cases of people that take this stuff and the infection immediately resolves. And you might have to do that because your primary care might not, they might not give you any solutions.
Interesting.
Can you, sorry, I was just going to ask, since you brought it up, can you dive into some of the things that you supplement with that may be helpful for people? Or just you kind of mentioned some protocols or things like that. Could you dive into that a little bit more?
Yeah. And I think to kind of finish that thought, I think a first line would black walnut. I actually see it on the computer here. Wormwood, clove. That is a great supplement as a first resort right there. I don't know all the ingredients, but I'm looking at a product right now. It says wormwood, black walnut, and clove. Very good anti-parasitic coverage, but also very good coverage for Lyme disease in general, co-infection coverage in general. There's an herb I can never pronounce called androcophis, great for co-infections. So I would hop on it, and primarily if you get bit by a tick, iLads has a database of Lyme literate practitioners. So I would utilize that also if you're bit.
And how do you spell that? iLads?
It's capital ILADS.
Okay.
They're kind of an organization spreading Lyme literacy.
Okay.
I think they've been pretty essential, and they help hook you up with a practitioner. So like when I was going through this, I contacted them and they were like, "Oh yeah, go see this guy in this area."
Nice. One of the things that I thought was interesting, my son just got off the Appalachian Trail and they went hiking for 4 days and they ran into one of the more earthy ladies. And what she was using was a garlic clove. Yep. She would rub the garlic clove all over her clothes. It would keep them away, but then she would also eat the garlic because apparently ticks don't like the smell of garlic.
No, they don't.
Which I thought was interesting. And I think she also mentioned something along the anti-parasitic effects of garlic, and it has some other benefits to it as well.
Garlic does a lot. Yeah. There's a lot going on with garlic.
Absolutely.
Even just eating the cloves themselves, that's fascinating. I wonder how much more effective that is than the sprays.
Yeah. His buddy, who after the first day, he had 8 ticks on him from walking because he didn't use any spray. My son did, thankfully, but his buddy didn't. He started eating the garlic cloves and he never had a tick on him the rest of the time.
I mean,
that was interesting.
I think there's credence to that, right? I think we should walk away with like, if that's working, let's explore that more. But as far as general treatments, I think Birmingham's a good example because there's kind of a crossroads, right? You can go the natural route, or you can go the more, I don't even want to say Western, but utilizing Western medicine, such as traditional antibiotics and antiparasitics, and sometimes antifungals as well. I think there's credence to both paths. I know in Birmingham, we have certain practitioners that, thank God, they're more Western, but at least they're still treating and they're going after the root cause. There's other ones, and I lean more in the camp now of the natural interventions. The reason being, like I was saying, by the year I hit 2015, I went too hard. My liver enzymes were through the roof. My immune system was so compromised. I was taking 3 antibiotics every day. I wasn't taking days off. So were we attacking? We were very offensive, but we weren't defensive. Going too offensive can have consequences. What I like about some more of these natural remedies is, okay, they support the liver. They support the viral load. They support the respiratory system. They support the inflammatory response. So there's more versatility and freedom, in my opinion, of going a little more down the natural route. And there were some studies done recently that, Japanese knotweed mixed with an herb called Cryptolepis is more effective than traditional antibiotics for Lyme. Specifically, they were comparing it to doxycycline, but I think based off what we know, it still stacks up against some pretty dominant forms as well. The other thing I think that's really beneficial about coming at it from a natural standpoint is the biofilm structure of Lyme. So Lyme creates, it can exist intracellularly, which is a very complex part of it. So it can exist within your cells. It can form cystic, persistent, more dominated forms. Stuff like grapefruit seed extract more treats the cystic form of it.
Yeah.
With a very unique compound of grapefruit seed extract. You got to be careful if you're taking doxycycline, because grapefruit seed extract can actually make doxy less effective. So there's complexity with all this, but the biofilm is I kind of think of almost Star Wars, where there's like the Death Star, but there's a shield around it. The more you can't penetrate the biofilm with traditional antibiotics.
Interesting.
So in fact, the more you use traditional antibiotics, the more these biofilm layers of Lyme, this sludge-like barrier, this fibrin actually strengthens. So it gets stronger the more you're using doxycycline. That doesn't mean that the antibiotics aren't going after other forms and still doing their job in other ways. But if we're avoiding the biofilm aspect, you're missing a very essential point of the disease. You guys make a product, BT Plus. I'm about to start taking it right now. It's got the lumbrokinase in it. It's got the serrapeptase in it. Both of those compounds are used very commonly with integrative practitioners with Lyme because they dissolve the fibrin around the biofilm. And there's 40 milligrams in your BT Plus, which is like the highest therapeutic dose for Lyme. So that supplement really does pack a punch. You got the NAC in there. You got the black cumin seed oil, I believe, as well. So a lot of benefits with that supplement with Lyme. But there is a crossroads at the end of the day. Do I want to go... And you get to choose your practitioner, right? Do I want to go down this more antibiotic heavy path?
Which has consequences on our gut microbiome and everything else, which can lead to a different issue down the road.
Well, yeah, I'm curious. You said you went too hard in 2015. Were you just talking about the antibiotics that you were on, or can you dive into that a little bit more?
Yeah, I didn't understand. And this is part of the reason I'm getting into health coaching, is I didn't understand pacing. Like, I don't need to take every antibiotic every day. I need to take days off. I need to be taking infrared saunas. I need to be taking like milk thistle to flush my liver. Probably need to be taking binders like chlorella. Chlorella is a great binder over a long period of time. Activated charcoal is good, but it can become really dehydrating. Chlorella you can still take around other supplements, but I didn't understand with Lyme, it's not just treatment. It's how do I balance this Herxheimer reaction, this inflammatory response? How do I balance my cortisol? How do I balance my stress level? How do I balance my nervous system? How do I repair my gut microbiome? I didn't understand all these other layers. I was only focused on antibiotics and Lyme. And that's what makes Lyme so complicated, is you have to be managing the whole terrain of what's going on. So I was ripping apart my gut. I was putting, excruciating amount of stress on my liver. Yes. Were things dying? Yes. But slow and steady really does win the race. And I wasn't going slow and steady. And now, Troy, you go ahead.
No, I was going to say one of the most unique things I've heard you talk about when you talked about your treatment was the bees and bee stings, which I thought was interesting. New piece that I had never even crossed my mind with it, but share a little bit of that. And this is obviously not medical advice for anybody, but it is interesting regardless.
Absolutely. So kind of going to the end of my story, 2023 was the turning point for me. And my wife had, at this point we've traveled, we've tried all these treatments, we've done all these things. Has there been success? Yes. But at this point, I've had concussions. I've had mold toxicity. I've had Epstein-Barr. I've got multiple co-infections. I'm starting to develop POTS. So all these things have stacked up at this point that it became very overwhelming. But my wife had read this whole book about this woman who was basically attacked by like killer bees. She got maybe 100 stings. She could tell the story better than me. Ended up going to the hospital, ended up waking up, a few weeks later and all of a sudden feeling a lot better. So she started to do all this research. A lot of it was anecdotal. A lot of it was, became more clinical over time. Apitherapy kind of came from this. So I was in Oregon and my wife was really connected with somebody that knew Dietrich Klinghardt in Seattle. And he apparently had said, if you could only do one thing for Lyme and one thing only, if you're on an island and it's like, well, choose your poison, bee venom therapy would be the only thing he would suggest in that situation.
Wow.
So I know there's a documentary on Netflix now. I know there's actually, I've been doing a lot of research since I started bee venom, and there is now a lot of research on it. So it's no longer just like, yeah, let's sting you with bees and see if you get better. There's a lot of credence to it being a very shotgun treatment. You know, when I say shotgun, I mean, it's doing so much at once.
Yeah.
It can penetrate biofilms. It has a lot of antifungal properties. It's great for Epstein-Barr. My body doesn't even show up as ever having Epstein-Barr since I've done bee venom therapy. But that's what changed the game for me, was my wife getting trained by an apitherapist. I did the blood work. No one should just hop into bee venom therapy and not get tested for an allergic response to bee venom therapy. You should have EpiPens around your home when you're doing this. So, you know, I don't think you should just wake up tomorrow and start doing bee venom. I think it's, you know, there's a training aspect to it. There's spots that you should sting, some spots you probably shouldn't sting. But at the end of the day, it's not overly complex.
Yeah,
it really is. You're getting stung by bees. And, you know, my goal going into that was, we've tried all these other methods. Why don't we go all out and see if there's credence to this? And it's what's gotten me to the point I'm at, along with a lot of other stuff where I'm at today.
Along those lines, one of the others that I heard that was kind of out there to me when you're dealing with Lyme and tick infections, they mentioned putting a fever-inducing therapy. So they'll put somebody in the hospital and they will induce a fever of 107 degrees, which seems like you would die from it. It was actually Dr. Mark Hyman who mentioned it.
Yeah.
He put himself through that at 107 degrees. Obviously, you need to be under medical care, but when you're doing that, he said the body then comes in, and that's the body's mechanism to destroy those infections that are in the body. And he said it worked for his. I think his was Bordetella or the Borrelia.
Fairy. Yeah.
He mentioned he had 2 of them, and it wiped it out with just that high fever.
Wow.
So I think there's so many different treatments out there, just like the different symptoms and everything else.
There are.
It is an interesting world of Lyme disease, and I think something we're all becoming more aware of and more accustomed to. So to me, there is a lot of despair with people who have Lyme because they go through so much stuff. So what I'd love for you, and I appreciate everything that you've shared with us, kind of your heart and everything that's gone on and kind of your story with Lyme itself. But what's one thing you can do? Because one of the things that I think we're about is not leaving people with fear, but instead, how do we instill hope for people? And if you can just kind of summarize and say, where is the hope for somebody who's out there right now suffering from Lyme or alpha-gal? And what can you share that says, hey, there is more to this story than just the despair that we hear all the time?
Absolutely. Because I think it's such a great question. I like focusing on the hope, right? It's so easy to go like for an hour on all the complexities and the dismay and the suffering. But I think my journey is important because it does show that it's never too late, right? And I know it seems like there's an interesting blend of people in the Lyme community where I talk to a lot of people that they were always type A before they got Lyme. And I think that's very interesting. They were always type A, and then their life flipped upside down. So that really does wreck a person to be like, I want to be this perfectionist and this type of person, but I have 100 things going wrong in my body. I think where to leave people, though, is even if you didn't get diagnosed for 15 years, you've got to treat that first day as a new beginning. I do think that people can get so frustrated, they can give up, they can get lost in the complexity. But there's never been more options. There's never been better practitioners. There's never been a more holistic way to approach it than now. even Birmingham, I'm a patient at Sparrow Health and Performance. They're fantastic. They have Lyme literate practitioners. I know Med Help here. They come at it. They come at it from a little bit of a different approach, but I think there's credence to what both practitioners are doing. There's more Lyme literate practitioners. Also, I think the biggest thing is you really have to set yourself up with a team, right? You need to look at this from a emotional standpoint. I think from a spiritual standpoint, from a physical standpoint, obviously. But I think the more you're willing to open yourself up and be like, okay, well, I need the person that can handle the Lyme. Maybe I need the health coach to do this. I don't think you need 20 people in your ball court, but I think three to five is actually a pretty good number. Maybe you need to be meeting with a counselor. And the more you can get your team to communicate, I think the faster it accelerates this healing process. I've gone to counseling, I've gotten them involved, and, I've had practitioners collaborate and communicate with each other. I've worked with a health coach. The more everyone's on the same page, the better your story is generally going to unfold at a more rapid pace. But I really do want to tell people to never give up, to not lose hope. And if they feel like they've tried everything, because I've been there might be just something right around the corner that could flip the script. That's what, my wife had to kind of remind that. For me, I was like, I've gotten to the point a few times where I've just been like, what's the point? I've done all this stuff. I'm still here. Now we're fast forward to now. I'm like, wow, I've gotten 70% of the way healthy. That's a lot. That's a lot from 0%. But she always kind of was a voice in my ear of, I just don't think we're on the right track. I think there's something else out there. I think there's going to be another window that opens. And bee venom was that for me, right? It was kind of the Hail Mary of, we've tried a lot of stuff. We've had some minor success. We've been just buying time in general. We've been kind of paddling in the deep end. But I think there can be hope right around the corner for a lot of people. And I think there's so much more awareness that more of these therapies, these treatments, people are being educated on. Whereas 10 years ago, you didn't have the education, you didn't have the awareness. So you really might have no options for a decade.
Yeah. Well, and Daniel, I appreciate you coming in, sharing your story with us. And what I'd love is if there's somebody else out there who's suffering with Lyme or has a family member with Lyme, how can they get in touch with you? I know you're doing your health coaching.
Absolutely.
And Lyme is going to be kind of your specialty, but you'll do anything from health coaching. How can people get in touch with you and use your services?
Yeah, there's a website on the way. It's going to be justicehealthcoaching.com.
Okay.
Right now, you can email me justiceforlyme@gmail.com. So it's justiceforlyme@gmail.com. Should I just give out my phone number? Or is that
if you want
I'm happy to give out myself. No, I've got no concern. You call me 205-482-3533. I'm willing to take any call. And the way I frame it is, if I knew everything I knew now and could go back to day one, we'd probably be looking at about a 2-year journey completed in 2015. Now, I think there's been a purpose in my story, in the length of it, in the duration, but I really do want to, work with people and get after the root cause and hopefully accelerate this healing process and, create better collaboration with their practitioners, give them all available options, help them find practitioners that are in their area. But I do think there's hope in healing, and hopefully I can be a big part of that story in a lot of people's lives.
I'm sure you will. I know no story is wasted, and yours certainly is not, and God will use it for great things. So if you're out there, you're suffering from Lyme, certainly give Daniel a call or an email, or
Absolutely.
Get on his website when it comes out.
Absolutely.
So, Evan, you have anything else for us? Any questions?
No, just thank you for coming on here, Daniel. Your story is awesome. Thank you so much for sharing it with us and for sharing all of these amazing insights.
Absolutely. Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Frontline Health Podcast by Centurion Health. As always, we want to encourage you to go out and take ownership of your health, because you are your best health advocate. We'll see you next time.
If you enjoyed what you heard today on the podcast, please consider subscribing and leaving us a review. We would love to hear your comments or questions about anything we've talked about on the show. For more health news, tips, and insights, follow us at Centurion Health on Instagram, Facebook, X, and YouTube. And for safe, effective, and affordable healthcare products made in the USA to help you elevate your health and life, visit centurion.health. We look forward to you joining us next time on the Frontline Health Podcast by Centurion.